Creepy apartment horror story. There are places in this world that hold on to memories the way some people hold on to grudges, tight, bitter, and long after the reason for the hurt has faded away. You don't always recognize these places right away. Sometimes they look clean, polished, even welcoming at first glance, like an old friend you haven't seen in years who hides the twitch in his eye behind a wide grin. That's what I thought when I first signed the lease for the apartment on the 4th floor of the crumbling brick building on the corner of 18th and Maple. To the casual eye, it looked like just another old structure in a tired neighborhood, a relic of the 1960s with narrow hallways and fading paint that smelled faintly of mildew. But there was something else too, something that didn't fit with the image the landlord had painted for me when I toured the place in daylight. It was in the silence that clung to the stairwell after sundown, in the way the walls seemed to sweat on hot nights, and in the faint, nearly imperceptible hum that filled the apartment when the rest of the city went quiet at 3 in the morning. I told myself I was imagining it, that this was just what old buildings did. Pipes rattled, floors creaked, and noises carried strangely. Everyone who's ever lived in an apartment knows the drill. But sometimes, when you tell yourself a thing often enough, you start to notice the cracks in your own argument. I began to notice how no one ever lingered in the hallway, how the other tenants averted their eyes when passing my door, how the landlord's smile had faltered just a fraction when I signed the paperwork. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have spent the next year with that place crawling into my dreams, whispering in the shadows, teaching me that some apartments don't just hold people, they consume them. The first night should have warned me, but exhaustion is a hell of a blindfold. I'd moved in with nothing but a couple of suitcases, a mattress I'd dragged up 4 flights of groaning stairs, and a second-hand lamp with a cracked base. The moving truck hadn't arrived yet, so the place was stripped bare, the way an empty skull is stripped of flesh, echoing, hollow, and not entirely lifeless. I set up the mattress in the center of the living room because the bedroom felt too tight, too suffocating, as if the walls were leaning inward just slightly, waiting for me to close my eyes. I laughed at myself for thinking that. New place jitters, I told myself. Happens to everyone. But it didn't explain the sound. Not the creak of pipes or the scratch of mice in the walls, that I could have handled. This was different. Just after midnight, as I lay half asleep on that mattress with the lamp still burning, I heard the faintest rhythm coming through the floorboards. A soft thud, 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 like footsteps pacing in the apartment below mine. Only, the landlord had told me the unit beneath me was vacant, had been vacant for months. I wanted to believe maybe he'd gotten his facts wrong, maybe someone had moved in without me noticing. But the longer I listened, the clearer the sound became, deliberate and steady, as though someone were walking back and forth directly under me in a space that was supposed to be empty. At one point, the footsteps stopped. That should have been a relief, but instead it left me listening harder, every muscle in my body tensed. And then, from the corner of the bare room, in the patch of darkness just beyond the glow of my lamp, came a low dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I sat up so fast my head spun, but of course there was nothing there, just shadows and silence. I didn't sleep much that night. The lamp stayed on until the bulb gave out around dawn, and even then I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not in that apartment. Not even close. By the second week, I had learned to live with the noises, or at least to pretend I had. That's what city living is, right? You train yourself to ignore the strange habits of buildings that have lived longer lives than you, their bones groaning and their lungs wheezing through old vents and ducts. But what I couldn't ignore was the smell. It started faint, like something sour left too long in the garbage, drifting up from the vents in the kitchen. I cleaned obsessively, scrubbed the sink, poured bleach down the drain until my eyes watered. Still, the smell lingered. It had that metallic undercurrent, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat, the way blood smells when you nick your gums brushing your teeth. The landlord came by once to fix a leaky faucet and I asked him about it. He wrinkled his nose, glanced at the vent, and said something about old pipes before hurrying out, his footsteps echoing too quickly down the hall. That's when I started noticing the way the air shifted at night, how it would grow heavy around 3 in the morning, pressing down on me like a wet blanket, making it harder to breathe. The pacing from the vacant apartment below hadn't stopped either. Sometimes it grew louder, urgent almost, as though whoever, or whatever, it was had grown impatient with me. On those nights, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, every creak and pop magnified, the hum in the walls like a pulse. I told myself I'd move out, break the lease, find some excuse. But then I'd wake up in the morning, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and the apartment would look perfectly normal again. The smell would be gone, the air would feel light, and I'd convince myself it was all in my head. You see, that's how these places get you. They let you doubt yourself just long enough that you stop trusting your own senses. And once you stop trusting what you hear, what you smell, what you feel in your bones, that's when the apartment begins to tell its own version of reality that it wasn't just the noises and the smells anymore. It was the way the apartment began to rearrange itself around me. Not in obvious ways. You wouldn't walk in and find the furniture on the ceiling or the doors leading to different rooms than they had before. No, it was subtler, crueler than that. I would leave my keys on the counter and find them hours later on the floor in the hallway. A framed photo of my parents, the only piece of decoration I had managed to put up in those early days, slipped from its nail 3 times in 1 week, always landing face down, glass unbroken but smeared with some kind of oily residue I couldn't scrub away. At first I chalked it up to stress, maybe sleepwalking, even though I had never had that problem before. But then came the whispers. Not loud, not even distinct, just the suggestion of words, threading through the hum of the old radiator, curling up from the cracks in the walls. Sometimes I thought they were calling my name, stretching the syllables too long, too wet, like someone trying to remember how human language was supposed to sound. Other times it was laughter, the kind of laughter you hear behind closed doors when you're a kid and your parents are talking about something you're not meant to understand. I tried plugging my ears with cotton. I blasted music through headphones until my ears rang. But the whispers didn't care about that. They weren't sounds exactly. They were ideas, pressing against the inside of my skull, seeping into my dreams. The worst was the night I woke up on the living room floor with no memory of how I had gotten there. The mattress was still in the middle of the room, sheets rumpled, but I was lying beside it, cheek pressed to the wood, and in the silence I realized the pacing below me had stopped. For the first time since I'd moved in, it was utterly quiet. And that was when I heard it, a long, slow breath, exhaled just inches from my ear, hot enough to raise gooseflesh across my neck. I jerked upright, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, the smell of rust, and the faint echo of someone's satisfaction at finally being noticed to be why the time the first month passed, I had stopped inviting people over. Not that I had many friends left in that city, but I made excuses when coworkers suggested dropping by after drinks or when my sister offered to help me decorate. I didn't want anyone else to feel what I felt the moment they crossed the threshold, that subtle but undeniable heaviness, like the air was thick with something unspoken, something watching. The one person who did come by didn't stay long. It was a woman I'd been seeing casually, the kind of shaky, almost relationship that thrives in bars but dies in daylight. She stepped inside, looked around at the bare walls, the mattress still in the living room, and laughed nervously. "Creepy place," she said, half joking, and I tried to laugh with her, but the sound caught in my throat. She kept glancing toward the hallway, the dark strip that led to the bathroom and the bedroom beyond, and after 10 minutes she said she had to go. When I walked her to the door, she whispered, "It feels wrong in there," and kissed my cheek like she was saying goodbye to more than just me. That night, the whispers grew louder. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm was different, more urgent, like they were mocking me for trying to bring someone else into their home. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, until the pacing started again from the vacant unit below. Only this time, I noticed something that chilled me in a way I can't quite explain. The footsteps didn't move back and forth anymore. They rose. One at a time. Slow. Deliberate. As though someone was climbing the stairs. My heart hammered as I waited, eyes glued to the door. But the steps never reached my floor. They stopped somewhere between the 3rd and 4th landing, and then the silence pressed down, heavier than before, until I thought my chest would cave in. I told myself in the morning I'd talk to the landlord, demand answers about that vacant unit. But when dawn came, the hallway outside my apartment was empty, and the only footprints on the dusty stairs were mine. I finally confronted the landlord one humid afternoon when the smell from the vents grew so strong I couldn't eat. It clung to everything, my clothes, my sheets, even my skin. I cornered him in the lobby, his comb-over plastered to his head with sweat, and demanded to know if there was something dead in the walls. A rat, a raccoon, anything. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the stairwell as though he was afraid the building itself might be listening. Old place, he muttered, jingling the keys on his belt. Pipes, wiring, draft, smells travel. But I wasn't buying it. I pressed him about the apartment beneath mine, the one he swore was vacant. At first, he insisted it was empty, locked up tight. Then, after a long silence, he sighed and rubbed his face with one trembling hand. Some places, he said slowly, choosing his words like a man trying not to incriminate himself, ain't meant to be lived in long. The walls remember too much. That was all he gave me before hurrying away, leaving me with a phrase that looped in my head until I couldn't think straight. The walls remember too much. That night, I dreamed of faces pressed into plaster, eyes bulging, mouths open wide in silent screams. I woke up gasping, sweat-soaked, with the faint outline of a handprint smudged into the wall above my mattress. I touched it, half asleep, and the paint beneath my fingers was cold, wet, almost like the wall itself was sweating something human. I scrambled back, heart hammering, but when I flicked on the lamp the handprint was gone. The wall looked smooth and clean, the way it always did in the morning. But I knew better. I knew I hadn't been dreaming all of it. And when the pacing started again below me, slow, dragging, measured, it felt less like footsteps and more like the heartbeat of the building itself, keeping time with mine, waiting for the moment when the two would finally sync. I began keeping the television on at all hours, not because I wanted to watch anything but because I needed the sound. Laughter tracks, canned applause, the drone of news anchors. It was all better than the silence that seemed to lean in close whenever I turned it off. But the building didn't like that. More than once I woke in the dead of night to find the TV screen frozen on static, the remote across the room where I hadn't left it. The whispering was louder when the static hummed, threaded into the crackle like a choir just beneath the surface. I tried sleeping with music, but that didn't work either. My phone would shut off at 3 a.m. sharp, no matter the charge, no matter if it was plugged into the wall. 3 a.m. Always 3 a.m., the hour when the air grew thickest, when the pacing below grew restless, when I swore I could hear something brushing against the underside of my floorboards. My body began to wear the strain. I stopped eating much, stopped sleeping more than a couple hours at a time. My coworkers noticed, asked if I was sick. I laughed it off, but my reflection told the truth, hollow eyes, skin pale, the beginning of something haunted settling into my features. Once, my sister called and asked if I was okay. I almost told her everything, almost begged her to come stay with me just so I wouldn't be alone. But then, from the corner of the room, I heard a low chuckle, deep and wet, like a throat full of mud. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't a dream. It was there. And in that moment, I knew if I brought anyone else into that apartment, the thing in the walls, the thing that remembered, would only grow stronger. It didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to belong. The first time I actually tried to leave for good, the building stopped me. It sounds crazy, I know it does, but there's no other way to explain it. I had packed a bag, nothing more than a change of clothes, my wallet, and the photo of my parents, and I told myself I'd crash on my sister's couch until I figured things out. It was just after midnight, the time of night when the world feels most vulnerable, and I thought if I moved quickly, didn't think too hard, I could get out before the apartment noticed. But as I stepped into the hallway, bags slung over my shoulder, the lights above me flickered and went out. One after another, like dominoes, until I was standing in a blackness so complete I couldn't even see my own hands. My first thought was to bolt for the stairs, but then I heard it, the dragging sound, that slow, deliberate pull, only this time it wasn't beneath me. It was behind me in the hall, closing in. I ran, stumbling forward in the dark, my bag banging against my hip, my breath tearing out in ragged bursts. But the hallway stretched longer than it ever had before. I swear to God, no matter how far I ran, the stairwell never came. My shoes slapped against the old wood, echoing back at me, and over it all rose the whispers, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, hissing in a language I couldn't understand. My legs gave out before my courage did. I dropped the bag, fell hard against the floor, and when I looked up, the emergency light above the stairwell finally blinked on. The door was right there, just a few feet away. But something stopped me from moving. My body wouldn't obey. My arms shook, my legs twitched, but I couldn't drag myself an inch closer. It was as though the floor had turned to tar, holding me down. I don't remember how long I lay there, pinned by nothing but air and fear, but when the lights came back on, I was outside my own door, the bag gone, the photo gone, everything I'd packed swallowed whole by the building. The message was clear. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. After that night, something in me broke. I stopped fighting the apartment, stopped trying to impose my own rhythm on it. Instead, I began to notice how it wanted me to live. Meals at odd hours, when the air seemed less heavy. Sleep in brief bursts on the couch, never in the bed anymore, because the bedroom door refused to stay open and I couldn't bear being shut inside. I started keeping notebooks filled with the things I saw and heard, because I realized too late that my memory was slipping. Days would vanish into hours, hours into minutes, and sometimes I'd look up at the clock and find that entire stretches of time had simply gone missing. The notebooks became proof that something was happening, that it wasn't all just me losing my mind. But when I flipped back through the pages, the handwriting didn't look like mine anymore. The words slanted differently, letters looped and jagged in ways I'd never written. Worse, some of the entries weren't in English. The shapes on the page looked ancient, curling symbols that hurt to look at too long. Once, I woke to find the pen still in my hand, ink smeared across my fingers, though I had no memory of writing. The words on the paper read, "We are in the walls. We have always been here." The sight of that scrawled in my own notebook sent a chill through me deeper than anything I'd felt before, because it meant whatever was inside that apartment wasn't just whispering anymore. It was using me as its voice. And when I glanced up from the page, I caught sight of the wall across the room, just for a second, shifting like wet clay, a face pressing forward from within before melting back into plaster. By the end of that first season in the apartment, I wasn't sure where I ended and the building began. My reflection didn't look quite right anymore. Sometimes, in the bathroom mirror, my mouth would lag behind when I spoke, or my eyes would seem to glance just slightly to the side, as if something inside me was looking elsewhere. The smell never left now. It clung to me at work, in the grocery store, on the bus. People began to avoid me without knowing why, their noses wrinkling, their shoulders tightening as though they'd walked into a draft I carried with me. Nights were worse. The pacing below never stopped anymore. It grew into a constant, endless march, footsteps circling, as though wearing a groove into the very bones of the building. Sometimes it was so loud I swore the boards beneath me would splinter and something would claw its way through. And the whispers, they didn't just come from the walls anymore. They came from the drains, from the vents, from the crack beneath the front door. Once, half asleep, I heard them rising up from inside my own chest, vibrating against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I don't know when I stopped questioning it. I don't know when the fear turned into something else, something like acceptance. The landlord's words came back to me often, the walls remembered too much. And I began to think maybe that's what was happening to me. Maybe the apartment was remembering me before I was even gone, swallowing my story into its rot, etching my footsteps into its floors, pulling my voice into its endless chorus. I tried one last time to leave, in the dead gray light before dawn, but when I opened the door, the hallway stretched impossibly long again, that same trick it had played before. Only this time, I didn't run. I just stood there, staring down that endless corridor, listening to the whispers swell until they drowned out my thoughts. Then I closed the door and went back inside. The apartment had one. Part of me knew it was always going to. Winter came early that year, though maybe it only felt that way because of the apartment. Outside, the city slushed through its usual routine, gray skies, the stink of wet pavement, buses chugging exhaust. But inside, the cold was a living thing. I'd crank the radiator until it groaned, metal hissing with heat, and still the air felt sharp enough to cut. My breath puffed in front of me in faint clouds, drifting into corners that seemed darker than they should have been. The whispers loved the cold. They sharpened with it, words I almost understood now threading through the nights. Sometimes they spoke in chorus, voices rising together like a hymn. Sometimes it was just one, low and steady, speaking directly to me. It was around then I realized the apartment wasn't just keeping me. It was shaping me. The notebooks piled higher, but now the entries weren't mine at all. Entire pages filled overnight with those curling, foreign symbols, none of which I could translate but all of which I somehow knew belonged to the building's memory. My dreams bled into waking life, dreams of standing in the basement I'd never visited, surrounded by walls slick with something black, hearing footsteps circle me in the dark. I'd wake gasping on the couch, taste of rust in my mouth, only to find dirt beneath my fingernails as if I'd been clawing at earth. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering my phone. Bills stacked on the counter, unopened, and still I couldn't leave. I didn't want to leave anymore. That was the worst realization of all. That fear had curdled into a strange kind of belonging. When I pressed my hand against the walls, I didn't recoil at the cold. I pushed harder, as if I might slip through, as if the apartment might finally let me all the way in. It was the basement that finally called me down. I'd avoided it since moving in, mostly because the door to it always seemed to stick, swollen with damp. But one night, 3 a.m. of course, it swung open on its own with a screech that echoed through the stairwell like something dragging its nails down metal. I should have stayed upstairs, locked my door, pulled the covers over my head like a child. But the truth is, by then I was past pretending. The whispers had grown bolder, louder, and when that door yawned open, I could hear them spilling out like breath from a long-sealed tomb. So I went. Barefoot, pajama pants clinging to my legs, skin raised with gooseflesh though the air was stiflingly hot. The steps groaned under me as I descended, and with each creak I swore I felt a presence moving closer, as though something unseen was matching my pace. The basement was worse than my dreams had promised. The walls dripped with condensation, the bricks blackened, crumbling in places. The air smelled thick, like rust, like rot, like something left to spoil for decades. In the center of the room was a circle of dirt, raw earth in the middle of the concrete floor, as though the building had a wound that refused to heal. And in that dirt, impressions. Dozens of them. Footprints, handprints, some so deep it looked like whoever made them had tried to crawl out. My breath hitched. I staggered closer despite myself, crouching at the edge of the circle. That was when I heard it. Not a whisper this time, not a laugh or a sigh, but a word. Clear, unmistakable, spoken in a voice that rasped like it had come through stone itself. Stay. I bolted, tripping over the last step, skinning my knees, slamming the basement door shut behind me. But I didn't lock it. Couldn't. Some part of me already knew it didn't matter anymore. That door would open again whenever the building wanted it to. After the basement, I stopped pretending I was in control of anything. Days bled together. I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. I only knew the rhythms of the apartment now, the surging hum of the radiator at dusk, the footsteps pacing beneath the floor at night, the whispers rising like a tide at 3 a.m. I barely ate. When I tried, the food tasted spoiled, metallic, even straight from the package. Water from the tap carried a faint red tinge, like diluted blood, though when I held the glass up to the light it looked perfectly clear. I thought about calling my sister again, begging her to come, but every time I picked up the phone, the line was filled with static, and beneath it, that same chorus of voices. They didn't want me to reach out. They wanted me here, alone. And the worst part? I was beginning to understand them. Not just the whispers anymore, but the symbols in my notebooks. My hand would twitch in the middle of the night, scratching across the paper, and when I woke to read what I had written, I could almost sound the words out. We remember. We bind. They were telling me things, secrets about the building, about the people who had lived here before me, people who hadn't made it out. I found myself wandering the halls sometimes, barefoot, tracing my fingers across the walls as though I could feel them breathing beneath the paint. And I could. God help me, I could. The walls pulsed faintly, a heartbeat just under the surface, and when I pressed my ear to them, I heard sobbing. Not just one voice, but dozens. Maybe hundreds. A chorus of trapped souls, all folded into the plaster, all waiting. And still, the pacing below never stopped. It had become a metronome to my life, a steady beat that anchored me to the building. The apartment wasn't just a place anymore. It was a body, and I was living inside its skin. It was around this time the dreams started changing. They weren't just nightmares anymore, not the usual flickers of faces in the walls or the endless staircase that never led outside. These dreams were instructional, almost rehearsals. I'd see myself walking down the hallway barefoot, hands trailing along the wallpaper, and I would know where every nail had been hammered, every patch where paint had peeled, every scar the building wore. Sometimes the dreams placed me back in the basement, standing at the edge of that raw circle of dirt, watching the prints shift and writhe as if the ground itself were restless. And sometimes, I swear this is true, the dreams weren't even mine. I would wake up gasping, heart pounding, and realize I had just lived a memory that wasn't mine at all. A woman screaming into the darkness while her neighbors pounded uselessly on locked doors. A child curled on the floor, clutching a stuffed bear while shadows reached under the bed. A man arguing with the landlord in the very lobby where I'd once demanded answers, only to vanish mid-sentence as if the building had swallowed him whole. These weren't just dreams, they were the building's memories, the walls remembering too much, pressing those lives into me until I could no longer tell where they ended and I began. The whispers were clearer now. They called me by name, not mockingly but fondly, the way a family might call to someone who had finally come home. And I began to answer. At first it was a word, muttered in sleep. Then sentences, scribbled into notebooks I didn't recall touching. Eventually, I caught myself speaking back aloud in waking hours, murmuring to the walls as though they were old friends. The strangest part wasn't that I was doing it, it was how natural it felt, how right. The loneliness that had gnawed at me since I first moved in was gone. I wasn't alone anymore. I would never be alone again. The landlord stopped coming around after that winter. Maybe he knew what was happening to me. Maybe he had always known. His office door downstairs stayed locked, the blinds drawn, and though his name was still on the mailbox, I never heard him moving inside. Sometimes, when I passed through the lobby, I thought I caught a glimpse of him, just a shadow at the end of the hall, or the faint shuffle of feet slipping out of sight. But he never spoke to me again, never collected rent, never fixed the endless groans of the building. It didn't matter. I had stopped caring about the outside world. Bills piled in neat stacks on the counter, unopened. Food deliveries came less often, until finally they stopped altogether. I couldn't bring myself to answer the door anymore. The apartment provided what I needed. Not food, not water, not in any traditional sense. But the longer I stayed, the less my body seemed to care about those things. I could go days without eating and feel nothing but a strange, humming energy in my chest. My skin was pale, stretched, but I felt alive in ways I couldn't explain. The whispers soothed me at night, lulling me to sleep like a lullaby. The pacing below was constant, steady, almost reassuring now, like the heartbeat of a parent rocking a child. I realized, slowly, horribly, that the apartment didn't just want me to stay. It was changing me so I could. I was becoming part of it. Sometimes, when I pressed my palm to the wall, I felt something press back. Not cold, not threatening, warm, almost affectionate, like the brush of another hand. And sometimes, when I glanced into the mirror in the bathroom, I swore the wall behind me moved. Not shifted, not cracked. The apartment was alive. And it wanted me to be alive inside it, forever. By early spring, the line between dream and waking life was gone. I'd wake up standing in the hallway, hand pressed to the wallpaper, my cheeks smeared with dust, as though I'd been listening with my whole body. Sometimes I'd wake crouched by the vent in the kitchen, whispering into it like it was an ear pressed against mine. Once, I found myself kneeling at the basement door with my forehead resting against the wood, tears streaking down my face, though I didn't remember going there. The notebooks were full now, page after page of symbols and words that no longer looked foreign to me. I could read them. I understood them. They spoke of binding and keeping, of memory and hunger, of how a place can live if enough suffering is poured into its walls. And they spoke of me. The apartment had chosen me, they said. Not the landlord, not the woman who fled after 10 minutes, not the countless others who had tried to stay and failed. I don't know why. Maybe because I was alone. Maybe because I was weak. Or maybe because I was willing to listen. The pacing below had changed too. It wasn't random anymore, not circling or dragging. It was patterned now, deliberate. A language written in footsteps, rising through the floorboards until I felt it in my bones. Sometimes it matched my heartbeat. Sometimes it matched my breathing. And once, God help me, it matched my laughter, echoing perfectly in rhythm with the sounds spilling out of my throat. That was when I knew I wasn't just hearing the apartment anymore. I was part of its voice. Neighbors began to disappear. Not all at once, not in some dramatic sweep, but quietly, like lights winking out one by one on a long street. First it was the old woman at the end of the hall, the one who used to drag her trash bags too loudly and mutter about the smell in the vents. I realized one morning that her door had been left ajar, keys dangling from the lock. Inside, nothing. No furniture, no photos, no dishes, not even dust, as though she had never lived there at all. Then it was the young couple in 3B, the ones who fought so loudly I could hear them through the walls. Their music stopped one day, mid-song, a guitar chord frozen on the air, and when I checked, their apartment was hollow too, stripped bare down to the studs. Even their toothbrushes were gone. The building didn't just consume them, it erased them. The hallway grew quieter and quieter, until I was the only sound left. And that quiet, it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Pregnant. Alive. The walls hummed with it. The whispers grew stronger, no longer fragments but full sentences I could almost catch if I tilted my head just right. They told me not to be afraid. They told me this was what it meant to belong. They told me that everyone else had been temporary, but I was permanent. At night, when I lay in bed, I felt the building breathe with me, inhale when I inhaled, exhale when I exhaled. And deep beneath the floorboards, where the pacing had once wandered in restless circles, something had finally stopped moving. It was waiting. For me. It was around that time that the mirrors turned against me. I don't know how else to put it. For weeks I'd avoided them, not out of vanity but because every time I caught a glimpse of myself, I swore something was wrong. A delay in movement, a flicker in the eyes, a mouth that stayed smiling a fraction of a second too long after mine had gone slack. But eventually curiosity rotted away my caution, and one night I stood before the bathroom mirror and stared until my eyes watered. At first it was just me, hollow cheeks, pale skin stretched too tight, the faint outline of veins like blue worms beneath the surface. But then, so slowly I almost missed it, the reflection behind me shifted. The tiles on the wall bulged outward, pulsed, as if a hidden organ beat beneath them. My reflection didn't move away. It leaned in closer. And when I raised my hand to touch the glass, the hand in the mirror touched back, not flat against mine, but curling, gripping, pressing hard enough that the glass groaned. I staggered back, but the reflection stayed there, palm flat against the inside of the mirror, as though begging me to return. I left the light on in the bathroom that night, and the reflection stayed, watching, patient, waiting for me to come closer again. From then on, every mirror in the apartment betrayed me. The one in the hallway, the glossy black of the microwave door, even the dark reflection in the windows after sundown, they all showed things I didn't want to see. Faces in the walls. Hands crawling out of the plaster. And behind it all, always, my reflection grinning when I wasn't. Sleep became the most dangerous part of my life. Not because of nightmares, I stopped having those, but because of what happened when I slipped under. I'd wake to find myself standing in strange places, sometimes with the front door wide open, the night air thick and waiting like a mouth. Other times I'd wake in the stairwell, halfway down toward the basement, the doorknob still warm in my hand. Once, I woke lying flat against the kitchen floor, cheek pressed to the vent, whispering words that weren't mine but which tasted like blood in my mouth. The apartment wanted me moving even when I didn't. It wanted me exploring, opening doors, touching things I wasn't supposed to. My body obeyed whether I liked it or not. The worst night was when I woke to find I'd carved something into my own arm. Not deep, not enough to kill, just a symbol, the same ones from the notebooks, scrawled in jagged lines across my skin. I didn't remember doing it. But when I traced the shape with trembling fingers, I felt the apartment shiver, a low vibration running through the floor, the walls, even the air. As if it approved. As if it had been waiting for me to mark myself as its property. After that, the pacing in the basement stopped entirely. Not because it was gone. Because it no longer needed to move. Whatever had walked down there all those months was awake now, standing still, listening. And somehow, I knew, it was listening for me. The basement door became the heart of everything. I couldn't walk past it without feeling the weight of eyes on my back, dragging me down like invisible hooks. The door didn't look different. It was still the same chipped paint, the same tarnished knob, but the air around it was wrong. Thicker, denser, like wading through water. I tried avoiding it, but the apartment wouldn't let me. It shifted itself to guide me there. Hallways seemed longer, rooms stretched oddly, and no matter where I turned, I'd end up facing that damn door. Sometimes I'd hear whispers seeping out from the cracks, not from above or below but through the wood, as if the door wasn't a barrier at all but a throat, speaking directly into me. The symbols in the notebook started to change too, whole passages written in a hand that wasn't mine, sentences I didn't remember penning. Over and over, they repeated the same command, "Open it." My reflection mouthed the same words, lips moving in silent rhythm no matter where I looked. Even the pacing, though silent now, had become a pressure I could feel beneath my feet, a presence leaning against the floorboards as though waiting for me to lift the latch. Some nights I pressed my ear to the wood, trembling, and swore I could hear breathing, not heavy, not monstrous, but steady, measured, like someone waiting calmly on the other side of a thin veil. I told myself I wouldn't do it, that no force on earth could make me. But the apartment was patient. And patience, I was learning, is deadlier than rage.